can you hear me?
I can. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Dan.
I can't see Dan.
Again, that's not an all bad thing.
I can see there's several people in the meeting, so I had to expand my video window to be able to see everyone's camera at the same time.
Okay.
And Mark and Robert, currently I have the meeting set up that I'm showing my screen. If either of you have something you want to show, let me know, and I can enable the screen sharing for you.
I think right now we'll let you kind of control that portion. So, it's hard to tell. Do we have everyone here? And it is after 6. Are we ready to start the meeting, or do we need to wait a minute or two?
I think finance is all set, so it's just, I didn't see Emily on here.
Okay.
Is Emily here?
I haven't seen Emily.
Is Luke on?
Luke is on.
Video is off.
Okay, I can't see.
So do we have a quorum for personnel? I guess is what it comes down to with just us.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so let's get started. I'll call the Finance Committee meeting to order.
And I will call the Personnel Committee to order.
So for Finance, do you have the roll call, Bill?
I have the roll call noted for both committees. For personnel, we have Burke and Sullivan. For finance, we have Olson, Ramsey, Fazard, and Sullivan.
Okay.
Well, I think we should move on to the one and only topic of the joint meeting. And that is, let's talk about what's going on with people leaving and how would we want to look at reassigning people to a new configuration.
So
Matt, do you want to take that?
I don't think we need, this is pretty straightforward. I'll make a motion for Finance to, actually for personnel, to approve the what do you call it? Reorganization of public lands.
Okay, I'll second that from personnel side.
Is there a motion from Finance?
I will make that motion. This is Luke.
Is there a second for Finance?
I will second it.
Okay, so let's discuss this. Can you go down to the, well, first and foremost, does anybody have any issues with what he's trying to do from a position perspective?
And
No.
If I could just quickly, Mark and I have spent a lot of time thinking about this and having different conversations over the better part of the last year and a half, as we knew that Dennis Hellenbrand was heading towards retirement and how we were going to fill that gap. And the other situation is about a year ago, Tony Crom went out and interviewed in another community, and we kind of talked to Tony at that time about, although we couldn't guarantee anything, he was someone we valued and we wanted to retain him and make him aware that we had interest in promoting him and putting him in an enhanced position down the road. Number one, because I think there's an overall departmental goal of trying to enhance what we're doing in conservancy land management. Tony has a skill set. He was hired away from adaptive restoration, who we contract with to do a lot of work in the conservancy, and a great employee, great knowledge base, and someone we wanted to retain. And we want to, put Tony in this position to build off of the work that Dino's done and enhance what we're able to do from a conservancy land management. And then the city forestry piece, I think we've been trying to move Mark away from the day-to-day forestry and put in more of a leadership, long-term planning, both from a forestry and conservancy land standpoint. And we feel this best allows us to do that. In turn, we would post the 2 vacancies We're not adding to the crew. It'll still be a 6-person crew. Roles are going to be a little bit different. And then once we've brought the 2 new employees on, that's when Tony's promotion, if you will, would take effect. And the other 2 pieces are Kurt Meinholz, who has been involved in this discussion, who's our park crew foreman, and feels that Tony's worthy of this and that it's a good path forward. One thing, 2 things Kurt has asked for is to bring back the assistant parks foreman that we took away upon Dave Beck's retirement, and then how we deal with Oak Hill moving forward if Oak Hill returns. And I think that's a big if post-pandemic, if prisons are going to allow that type of external exposure again. It'll be interesting to see if we see that work crew come back or not. And if they don't, that's going to leave a big hole for us. If they do, we feel the duty pay suggestion, it doesn't commit us to anything, but it allows us to add that to one of our park maintenance workers to rightfully compensate them for additional work.
So Matt, the vacancies that are here is for the grade 6, is that the grade minimum?
That is grade minimum. You'll note that when both Andrew Kelly and Kevin Peternell were hired, we started them at the minimum for the position. Andrew has gotten, let me rephrase that. I think we started them at 10% above. Mike and Bill might be able to help me there, but I think that's where they started. And my intention is that I know Andrew for one has gotten a bump as a result of the evaluation, the merit pay process. I believe that both Andrew and Kevin started at the base and have gotten bumps last year in the merit pay program.
I think that's right, Matt.
And what is your planned timing for these 2 vacancies?
We want to get those out as soon as possible and advertise those and go through our normal process in soliciting applicants. I think in conversations Mike and I have had, we have an interesting applicant pool based on situations currently and people that might be looking for this type of work. The idea would be is that we would maintain flexibility with the assistant foreman role, that if we had a candidate that we felt warranted and for us to retain or to attract the right candidate, that we needed to add that assistant foreman in. Otherwise, Kurt's asked that we have up to a year to institute that. If we're going to bring both new people in at the bottom of 6, that we'd have up to a year, and then go through a process with our existing crew, the 2 existing crew members and the 2 new crew members, to kind of have an application process for that assistant parks foreman.
How long does it take to get somebody on board right now? Right. So say for the sake of argument, we approve these tonight, right? It's now the 21st of April. Given the fact that you have to recruit and theoretically wait for severance period from the existing position, is June 1st really what we're talking about?
I think that's really ambitious. I think even June 15th would be the earliest I'd imagine that we'd have somebody able to start, and probably looking more at July 1st.
So one of the concerns I have, so we talked about Dino and whoever the other one was that is it Meyer?
Yeah.
That have given notice, I guess. Right, so Dino has lots of vacation, so we're paying him for how long?
Till June 1st. He's already using his vacation and leave. But his retirement date would be June 1st, be the last.
And so when is Meyer off the payroll?
His anticipated start date at his new employment is May 15th.
Okay, so conceivably we could have 1/12 of both of their salaries before somebody else started. But you didn't factor that into the budget impacts.
We did not.
Okay. So essentially we have what? It's basically 6.
Yeah, the budget numbers were put together looking at what the annual impact would be. And I think if there are some savings from those two positions, and depending on what the benefit levels are taken, that could easily cover that, certainly for this year.
Right. So that's what I was getting at, is if we had a month of openings, right, between the two positions, that would be about 10 grand for the two of them. And that would put you right back to the budget. So just on salary, right? Not fully loaded, right? So I'm assuming that the benefits would get us there as well. So just on salary, the month that we didn't have the separated employees on the payroll and the time it took to get new ones on, that would come to about 10 grand, which would cover for this year the impact of these changes. Everybody,
yeah, that's right.
Does everybody get that?
Yes.
I have a question about Mark Wagner. His job would be redefined also. Is that correct based on this? Would his salary be changing?
His salary would not be. His job's really evolved. He was promoted to the assistant director when I was hired. And
okay.
We've been slowly transitioning the day-to-day of the city forester away from that assistant director role.
Okay.
You may remember that Tony Crom was the interim city forester in 2018. And what we're trying to do is get Mark more, the forestry role that we're putting on Tony, there's a lot of day-to-day. It's hard to be in long-range planning and the things that Mark's working on in terms of long-term conservancy management, and that you're fielding calls about where the trees staked in the terrace and having to come out and stop what you're doing and
sure,
really aligning skill sets to what we need them to do.
mm-hmm. But this won't affect his salary at all?
No.
This change? Okay.
Not my intention.
I have.
Well,
Yeah, Mayor, I
have two
questions.
If I could, one of them is that this is for Matt. Do you need Dino has so much experience, and I wonder if you need any overlap for 10 or 15 days, or the new employees would just learn. And the second is for 2021 budget, so it will be just about a $10,000 that we need to cover, and Bill Foley could answer that one.
So, Mayor, to answer your first question in terms of Dino's expertise and having overlap with the new employee, we would have loved that. And when I started a little over 3 years ago, Dino told me he was going to be here another 5 years. And so we knew it was coming, but it came a lot quicker than we were expected, or than I was expecting. He's essentially, I mean, he's using his leave, his vacation time that he has built up right now. And although his retirement date is June 1st, he's effectively done working. Now, he has shared with Kurt that if we need him to come in, if we get in a pinch, he's willing to do that. And I know that Dino will always serve as a resource if we have questions, historical things that we need to figure out. I am very confident that with the knowledge transfer that we've been doing from Dino to the rest of the crew over the last 3 to 4 years with new staff coming in, I think we're in a good place. I think we've got, we are down to 4 guys right now, but they're 4 very competent guys. They've been doing good work. They'll continue to do good work. And if we need to reach out to Dino, I know that we can do so.
Thank you.
So Matt, I think we need to be careful there. I get Dino's willingness to help out, but I think that the only way that we could practically do that is to bring him back as a contractor. I'm not sure how that would work under the retirement rules. So I'm going to leave it to you to figure out mechanically how to make that possible if necessary.
And I should note that we have LTE staff that we will go to in a pinch before we bring Dino back in. I mean, Dino offered that, but I think it's for a lot of reasons, he's effectively retired.
Right. But I'm just saying, as a contingency, it might be worthwhile to figure out, what restrictions there are on that type of callback, for lack of a better term.
Correct.
Because I think there are some restrictions that once you're, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike.
If Dino's retirement date is June 1st, then he's still on the payroll until then. So the retirement wouldn't take effect until after that. Is that correct, Matt? Not until June 1st?
That's correct.
Anytime he works between now and then, just extends his leave of absence a little bit further and his retirement date further out. So if we try to bring him in after June 1st, then your concern, Mark, is completely valid.
And that's what I'm just trying to get Matt prepared for, right? Between now and June 1st, you're right. It's just an extension of his tenure. But afterwards, I think my recollection was that there are restrictions on whether he can even come back as a consultant, because he would not be an employee. So how that could work is, I think Matt needs to just get an understanding of what that means and whether or not it's even feasible.
I think there's a minimum separation period.
Right.
Where you can be brought back as well. So.
Yeah. So somewhere in here,
The separation period is 75 days, and you can't have any promise of employment in that interim time period. So it has to be after the 75 days.
So what that says is that this year is not workable, but next summer possibly would be, or sometime after October 1st. So I think what that says is that you got to have somebody give him that Vulcan mind meld to get a brain dump from him.
This is Bill. I've heard that there's some talk about waiving that minimum period of separation due to the pandemic. I haven't seen if that actually has gone into place yet, but that might be something to keep an eye on as well.
I think that was part of the governor's proposal, Bill, but I don't think the governor's proposal was approved.
Is there any further discussion on this topic? Hearing none, why don't we call the vote? For personnel, all those in favor say aye.
Aye. For finance, is there any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries for finance.
I guess I should say motion carries for personnel as well.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
So, Robert, I think you can, I'll move that we adjourn personnel.
I'll second that we adjourn personnel. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, personnel is adjourned. Thank you.
And Bill, do you want to just stay on the line or do you want to recess for the 10 minutes?
I think we can just recess, but people can stay on the line. We just won't have any discussion until 6:30.
Okay. Hey, Kathy,
Yeah.
um, before you leave,
Can you just go on mute and give me a call on my cell phone? Do you have that?
No, I don't.
Oh, sure. Before we start
Why
the
don't you
council
text
meeting?
it? Do you have her cell phone number?
Oh, right.
No, I don't.
Okay,
Sure.
let's see if I have both of you.
Yeah,
Maybe,
I'll do that.
maybe not. Wow, we should probably share more information with each other.
Okay, let's go here. Mute.
So I'm going to call to resume the Finance Committee meeting. Bill, so I'll let you share your screen.
Okay,
as
the
we go
agenda
back
should
to
be up
this.
now.
Yep. So the first, you already have roll call from prior. First item is approval of the minutes. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And the motion carries. Next item is audit of the bills. So the first item is ratification of the bills paid for April 7th. Is there a motion for those?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those
Aye.
opposed? I'll say that again. All those opposed? Okay, motion is approved. Next item is approval of the bills to be paid for April 21st. Is there a motion for that?
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
So,
And not yet, I don't think it's gonna be.
Bill, is there a way to put everybody on mute except for specific people?
Yes. I think I have the non-committee members muted now.
Okay. All right. Is there any discussion on the April 21st items? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And the motion carries. Next item is Resolution 20-22, approving assignment of 2019 general fund balances. So,
Yeah, I'm going to the page 19 in the packet, which is a summary sheet. If you'd like, I can provide an overview of the information on the summary and the recommendations, and then answer any questions.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Okay. So when we look at 2019, first of all, it was a very good year for the city. We had several positive things financially and ended with a large increase in our net available funds at the end of the year. Walking through this, there's a lot of moving pieces. I'll kind of go section by section. Listed on the top of the sheet in this top box compares the revenues and other sources and expenditures and other uses to budget. And when we look at just revenues over expenditures, we ended with 38,669 as the gross surplus number. But included in that is some large uses of fund balance. The most large of those is the fund balance that was used for the compensated absences or for the sick accrual. And if you recall, when we transitioned from holding those sick leave escrows in-house and paid them out to a third-party provider, we incurred a large expenditure in 2019 when those items were moved to the third party. So that is represented in this use of assigned fund balance for sick accrual of $1,395,566. That's all coming from assigned fund balance. And the way we've done this transition, now that those are paid off, they're off the city's books, we have the liability paid off, our obligation is done. Now those funds are in the retirees' hands at North Shore Bank, and they're managing their own accounts. So if we go down to the fund balance projections, if we look at the assigned fund balance for compensated absences, we started the year at just under 1.7 million. The deletions column is that use of the 1.4 million roughly. We've got some additions that are recommended that I'll go over in a minute, but that number is really coming from that assigned fund balance. We also have some use of assigned fund balance for the remaining flood recovery and carryover. We had money that was left at the end of 2018 in that assigned fund balance. That's now been used. And then we've also adjusted for changes in non-spendable fund balance, which includes the payment from the golf course to the general fund for the advance, which was 400,000. We also had some decreases in other non-spendable fund balance. And then I'm showing the additions to the public safety reserves for fire and EMS because those are items that we had identified during the budget process. So if we take into account all of those adjustments for planned use of fund balance, the net available funds is about $2.1 million. And really the main sources for that, on the revenue side, interest income was over $500,000 above the budgeted amount due to the increase in interest rates in our investment portfolio. We had the FEMA money that came in that helped reimburse us for expenditures that we had during 18 and 19 for flood recovery. We had about 451,000 of FEMA assistance. And we had the $400,000 payment from the golf course to the general fund for the partial repayment of the advance. So all of those are contributing to that increase in net available funds. If we look at this section 2, first, for our fund balance categories in the general fund, category 1 is non-spendable. So that's money that's not immediately available. That would be items that are prepaid, such as insurance premiums that were paid for the subsequent year. The largest one is the advance from the golf course. And we can see there that it started at roughly 2.3 million. We have the payment of 400,000, which reduced that non-spendable fund balance. So at the end of the year, it's down to 1.949 million. Overall, there's a decrease in non-spendable fund balance of 586,210. The next category of fund balance is assigned, so money that's been earmarked for particular purposes. We have compensated absences. The recommendation is that we take a portion of that available balance to add to that to continue setting aside money for the remaining liability. We have the decrease, which is the payments to North Shore Bank during the year. The recommended ending balance would be 1.164 million. Then we have the assigned funds for the public safety reserve for fire and EMS. And the recommendation based on the budget is to add 190,650 for fire, 80,000 for EMS. That brings those balances up to 825,621 for the fire reserve and 140 for the EMS ambulance reserve. Equipment replacement we have in the capital projects fund, so that actually that line could be removed. That's not part of the general fund balance. Flood recovery, we had this 284,633 remaining in assigned balance at the end of 18. That's now been used, so that's shown as a deletion, and that can be zeroed out at the end of the year. We also had an assigned fund balance for sidewalk carryovers from 2018 into 19. That's been used, that can be closed out. And then we had budgeted for, in addition to our annual assessment maintenance agreement, we had budgeted $25,000 to start setting aside funds for when the city needs to do its next revaluation, with the goal of setting aside $25,000 each year for 4 years, and then have that $100,000 for a revaluation should we need it at that time. So this shows adding $25,000 to that assigned fund balance. The last category of fund balance is the unassigned, and that is the city's emergency or rainy day fund. We were at 4.8 million at the start of, or at the end of 2018. The recommendation based on these assignments, we'd have 1,250,000 remaining that we could add to that, bringing that balance up to just over 6 million. And then finally, on the bottom of this sheet, it shows where that unassigned fund balance is then in percentage terms compared to the next year's budget. And our goal has been to be at around 25%, which is the middle of our target range of 2 to 4 months of operating expenses. We were pretty consistent with that from 2014 through 2017. That took a drop in 2018 because of the use of some of that fund balance for the flood recovery efforts. In 2019, based on these recommendations, we'd have the ability to put that back in, plus put an extra 500,000 in there, which would help give us some flexibility going into 2020 for either potential shortfalls in revenues, or if we have other costs or should need to dip into any of our emergency contingency this year. Now, it's a lot of information. There's supporting information on the following sheets that go through department by department for the general fund expenditures and revenues. But maybe I'll pause here and see if there's any other questions or discussion.
Bill, I have two
So-
questions. Mark, just
Mark, just,
well, okay.
well,
Maybe
okay,
you go ahead and
maybe you go
start,
ahead
and I
and
will ask
start, and I
a
will
bit
ask
later.
a bit
Go
later,
ahead.
so go ahead.
So the remaining balances for compensated absences, is that mostly sick leave for the existing staff or sick and vacation?
Yeah, it's sick and vacation. I'll flip to page 25 in the packet. This shows the ending balances at the end of 2018 and then 2019 for the compensated absences. I don't have this broken down between sick and vacation, but sick is definitely the largest component of that. So for governmental activities, which would be all city funds except for the enterprise fund, that was 3.5 million. If you add up the total value of all the accrued leave time based on the current compensation of the employees, if everyone were to leave at once, what's that obligation? It was 3.5 million. At the end of 2019, that's down to 3 million, and that's in large part because we had paid out those escrow amounts for retirees. So based on the recommendations, our percent funding of that, we would go from 21.7% funded to 38.3% funded. Another way to look at that is if we look at what the average amount that we've needed each year to set up the escrows or now the third-party accounts for employees, we're averaging about $250,000 per year. So we have about 4.7 years funded at that level. So we would want to continue setting aside money as we're able in future years, but we would be able to make a big jump this year into setting funds aside for that.
And if I remember correctly, the primary use of the golf repayment was to go into this. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what we had discussed at budget time, that would help provide funds each year that we could continue setting aside over the next 4 to 5 years, hopefully to get to 100% funding of this liability.
And so the flip side to that is that this is the vacation, or so say for the sake of argument, it's the pay time off for existing employees, and then when there is a retirement event, whatever balances that we have accrued would then transfer over to the bank. Is that correct?
That's correct. So if someone retires, that we would calculate their amount, make that payment to the bank, that liability comes off our books, and we would take the money from this assigned fund balance to make that payment.
And does that wash through the statement of operations, or is that just a balance sheet or a fund account transfer?
It does show up as an expenditure, and part of the reason why the reporting is we have our two different standards of accounting between our government-wide statements and then our fund statements. So under the GASB rules, when we look at our overall financial statements, like the statement of government activities, that includes items for the changes in the accruals. But on our fund statements, like for the general fund statement, we record the expenditure each year when we make the payment out.
Okay.
It's kind of a way of saying that we're showing the liability on the books, but we're still on the fund statements showing an expenditure each year as we make the payments.
But you're also showing the fund balance as a source of funds.
Correct. Yep.
Right. So so theoretically, that's a revenue item, right? The transfer from the liability to the operations piece, right? So the net effect has to be a wash, doesn't it?
Yeah, and on the fund statements, if I go back to that summary that I started with, that's looking at the general fund as a fund statement. So there, in 2019, we were showing an expenditure for this full $1.4 million, but we're showing that there's assigned fund balance as a funding source for that. So it does show as an expense, but it's showing coming from assigned fund balance. It doesn't reduce our bottom line unassigned fund balance.
Okay.
And that's because the fund statements look at a modified accrual base. So they're essentially looking year to year versus a full accrual like our government-wide statements.
Right.
And I can show you how that looks in the financials if you'd like.
No, it's more just that it really doesn't have an impact on the current year operations, right? Because it's coming from fund balance, or it's coming from assigned fund balance and coming out on the in our expense side. So net, there's no impact to our current year operations.
Correct.
Okay. Gurdeep, you had some questions?
Yeah. So well, let's say
Okay, let's say if
we get the
we
money
get the
from
money
FEMA.
from
So
FEMA, so
hopefully
both
both
for
for
the
the
donor
donor
fund
fund
as
as
well
well
as
as the
the
Park
Park
Street
Street
and
and
the Buckhead.
the Buckhead.
So would that
So
go in the
would that
general
go in the
fund? Where
general
would that
fund?
go?
Where would that go?
We've been planning to record any revenue from FEMA in the fund where the expenditures for the project occurred. So for the money that we received from FEMA in 2019, we had funded those initial costs out of the general fund contingency, which is why the revenue was recorded in the general fund. For items like the Donna Drive Pond or the Park Street slope, where the funding source was the stormwater utility, we would anticipate recording the revenue in that stormwater utility fund rather than the general fund.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So does anybody have any, well, let's step back. Was there a motion to approve?
Do not have a motion yet.
So is there a motion to approve as recommended?
So moved.
A resolution.
Right. Well,
Oh, no, strike that. My mistake.
I think the item would be resolution 2020-22, which would be approving the recommended assignment of fund balances.
Right.
So moved.
is there a second?
Second.
Is there any other discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? And so the motion carries. Item 2 under resolutions is 2025, approving the issuance of a tax incremental revenue bond for the Chartwell project in TID number 3. So can we go to that?
And this, the project has been completed. They've provided documentation of actual TIF eligible costs. They're in excess of the maximum amount in the agreement, which is $900,000. So this resolution would approve a TIF bond in the amount of $900,000. This agreement had 0% interest. Payments would begin in 2021 under this bond.
Okay. Is there a motion for this?
I'd move approval. I will second that.
Is there any other discussion? So Chartwell is what now?
Chartwell, go ahead.
This is Mike. They're a home health delivery company, and they specialize in that. They are the ones who took over the space that Globe University had.
Okay, that's really all I was looking for, is where this was. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is there any other discussion on this? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Let's go to agreements and contracts. Agreements number 1, reimbursement of Town of Middleton for engineering services for Capitol View Road bridge repairs. Is there a motion for this?
So moved. Oh, excuse me.
Second.
Is there any discussion? The only thing I had was, where is this coming out of? Is this coming out of Public Works, or is there a special, do we have a fund set up for this?
This is Sean Stowski, Mark. I'm proposing taking this out of the capital fund that was budgeted for this year's repair of some things that were identified for bridge repairs needed in the city because of last year's inspection reports. We just don't have a better fund that I could find.
Okay. Is there any other discussion for this item? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? And so motion carries. Next item is agreement with Carl Kleminski for prosecuting attorney services. Is there a motion for? Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
I have a
question from
Mike now.
Mike now,
Pandemic.
in pandemic, he's not doing anything, right? Or could be, there's no court, nothing.
Yeah, the court's been closed for this month, so what'll happen is there'll be a backlog of cases once the court is able to operate. So yeah, he's being paid. In fact, we have a retainer for both legal services contracts, but obviously Larry's working actively with us. I would say Carl is working on cases as well. He's just not in court because the court is closed for now.
Okay, thank you. So now he's
the only prosecutor in all we have, right, or anybody else?
I believe he handles it all. He has pretty much for the last 20 years.
Okay, thank you.
So for everybody's information, Carl paid completely on retainer. So if the number of cases in court spikes, he still pays the same amount. The annual increase from 21 to 23 would be 2% each year. We're very fortunate in the sense that both of our attorney services agreements are based on retainers, for the most part, completely for prosecuting services and mostly for the services from Murphy Desmond that are under general retainer.
So
my insurance doesn't cover litigations.
Does
insurance pay any of that?
No, insurance wouldn't cover litigation typically.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion on this item? All right, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? And the motion carries. Item number 3 is amendment to engineering services agreement with MSA Professionals for the Concentric Pond Dredging Project. Is there a motion?
I move approval.
Is
A
there
second.
Okay. Is there any discussion?
Is this coming out of SWUB money then?
It is, and I'll just make the general comment. I voted against this at Stormwater Utility because
It's engineering.
It's engineering, and it's even worse than that. The total engineering costs for this project are about 55% of the construction budget. So I think we just need to keep hammering staff that it's beyond what's reasonable. I understand it's a small construction budget, but it could be that then it's over-engineered, right? So we just need to keep, I think we just need to keep our eye on the ball that we are watching these engineering services agreements. 55% is outrageous.
Way over the standard.
Right.
Mark, is there another place where these funds would come from?
No, not the way that we have things set up.
So what's the dollar amount for this? You said it's 55% of the bud.
So the engineering fees are coming out to about somewhere in the neighborhood of $18,000. The total construction cost is about $70,000, $69,000. So the engineering percentages, again, it's original design and construction engineering coming out to about 55% of the construction costs, which is just outrageous. So that being said, I think we just need to make sure that we are very careful and push staff to make sure that these costs don't get out of control.
And I agree with Mark. Sometimes they come up with a bid with one thing and then they come back again to add another thing and then come back again to add another thing. You have First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, and it just keeps adding up. So I think we need to do something about it.
So what are our options right now?
There are none. There are none.
It's just a proven.
I shouldn't say that. You know, we can say that no, we don't want the construction services agreement. We're good with where we are, but then we run a risk that the project doesn't get implemented the way it was designed, right? So that's the barrel that we're over, or that we have somebody else take over the construction services. And there's no guarantee that it'll be any less. It could be a lot more.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just, I think we just need to make sure city staff is pushing these engineering firms to make these things reasonable.
Are most of the engineering firms comparable in the percentages that they're turning in on a project this size, or is it like, is MSA more out of line than other ones, or?
Well, there was no other firms that had an opportunity to bid on construction services, right?
Okay, gotcha.
So MSA did the original design work, and it's basically construction services as a follow-on to that.
Okay.
So, right, so we just need to, it's just a caveat that we need to be fully aware that these engineering firms need to be watched and need to be, we just need to be very careful with how much money we're spending on engineering compared to the construction budgets.
Okay.
Mark, for my own edification, what is, if it's 50% is high, what is a more standard number that you're used to seeing?
10 for design, 10 for construction.
Got it.
Mark, what was the explanation from the consultant for the increase in costs?
Well, the increase is for construction services, right? So if you take the construction services, right, that's about 26%. So that seems out of line, but you know, I think in the packet there's a cost roll up that outlines what they're doing. And the question is whether or not that's reasonable. And I you know, to me, the services seem to be reasonable. I just object to the cost.
I think Gary's on the call here. I know he's muted right now, but he might be able to give a better explanation. Although you were at the SWUB meeting when this was discussed, right?
Right. and the engineering firm said, "Yep, that's right. It's 55%."
Were they rationalizing it by being a very complicated project?
Oh my gosh, it's a backhoe.
They were going to watch the turtles and some of those things that hedging.
May I comment?
Please do.
It's not as simple as a backhoe because it's got to be dewatered first. When the city was able to do a little bit of dredging many years ago, the pond was totally dry. It's now at its highest level it's ever been. So there's a lot more, it's more complicated because it does have to be dewatered. It's also a complicated system, and it's not a single pond. There's a center pond with an outer pond, stone gabions between the two, and then another set of another gabion that goes out, so it goes into the stormwater. I'm reading this is you're saying this is supervision of the actual versus actual design of it. And the other thing I'd like to point out, the vote stormwater, there was only one no vote.
Who was that, Susan?
That was you. But our other consultants, one of whom is a stormwater engineer professionally, one from USGS, one from the university as a stormwater engineer, did not have problems with these. And Gary sent out a long email today discussing this.
I get that. I'm just saying.
And I think the rest of council should be able to read that email.
I'm not stopping them from reading it. I read it again.
That needs to be presented.
Well,
but just from the questions, I'm seeing that they haven't read it.
I think the issue is that, apart from so here we are, this is a draw on stormwater funds, and we just need to be careful in terms of engineering spend on this. It's because we've identified a couple of projects now where the amount of money on engineering seems to be exorbitant in comparison to the construction budget. That's all I'm saying. If you're willing to spend the money like that, that's fine. I think that we need to push back.
I'm not an engineer, so I can't specifically say, is this design cost? Is this supervision cost? This is a little more difficult because of having to deal with the wildlife.
We don't want to get lost in the weeds here, but the 18,205 is for construction oversight.
That's correct.
That's what that amount is for.
That's correct.
$18,000 on a $60,000 project is, as Mark says, very high.
So it's not for engineered design.
No, it's not for engineering. It's for the construction oversight.
Where is the engineering design on this project?
It's already done. It's already paid. It's the 37. I'm sorry. Let me get the right number.
It's the 14,000 something, wasn't it?
Right. You're right.
It was 14,809, and then there was another 4,900 added to that.
Okay, then if you turn this down, please tell me when this is going to get done, because this project has been before stormwater utility for ever since it was established. It was put on hold because of the floods. It needs to be done. We've got a flooding issue there.
I don't think the question is whether or not it needs to be done. I think Mark is just making a very valid point that some of this design work and these construction oversight contracts are getting high in relation to the overall cost of the project, and that we need to keep an eye on it. And I would agree with that.
Then you guys need to be talking to the engineers, because this was the lowest bid.
Well, you know what? Then that's a.
Take a vote.
Yeah. All right. Is there any other discussion on this item? So, all right. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Aye. Motion carries 3-1. Guys, people got to take a stand.
Protest, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
it's fine. We get it. It's fine.
All right. Next item is agreement with Emmons and Oliver Resources, Inc. for flood and plain scenario modeling. Is there a motion for this?
I will make that motion.
Second.
Is there any discussion?
And where is this coming from?
This is out of Water Resources.
Is it out of their budget?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Let's see here. Next item under bids and quotes. It's award of bid to Farner Asphalt Sealers LLC for the 2020 annual crack filling, spot sealing, GSB-88, surface sealing and chip sealing services. Is there a motion?
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
Oh.
So Larry, I don't remember having dealt with this contractor before. Do you have, do you have, at this point, do we have contracts and stuff?
I'm sure we do.
Okay.
Mark, this is Sean Stowski again.
Yeah, it's just
this will follow our standard contract, our standard bid agreement that we've used for many years. But Farner Asphalt has done surface treatment work for the city. They're one of kind of two firms that do this work, and I think they had our contract last year.
Oh, okay. I just didn't remember the name. Okay. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is award of bid to A1 Excavating for the Concentric Pond dredging project. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is under miscellaneous proposal from Chuck Non for illicit discharge, field inspection and testing services. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on this? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Item 2 under miscellaneous is proposal from MSA Professional Services, Inc. for engineering consulting services for the South Fork Pheasant Branch Creek repairs to the channel. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Is there a second? I'll second for discussion. Is there any discussion?
So for me, is this, so this is obviously outside of the master plan?
No, absolutely not. This is the South Fork. So basically from the confluence pond up to the South Pond and up to the Madison city line. So this was part of the reconstruction of the Pheasant Branch Creek corridor. That it's just delineated, I guess it's south of the confluence pond.
Yeah, it's essentially a south fork, pretty important.
Right. So the drainage way from the South Pond underneath 12, alongside Costco and into the confluence pond. Those are, I think, probably the most noticeable areas. But it also goes up from the South Pond up to Market Street, back in that area. And I'm not sure whether people are aware, but some of those valleys back in there just got severely eroded during the storms. That storm 2 years ago. So this is one of those things that they're going to be looking at to try and restore the creek bed. So, is there any other discussion on that? All right, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is update on first quarter 2020 investment reports. Bill, this is yours, right? Yeah.
Yes, and no action required on this item, just providing an update. Included in your packet are the investment reports for January, February, and March of 2020. Big story has really been in the last month with short-term interest rates just falling to the floor. The city is well positioned in having a laddered investment portfolio, and you can see the impact of that in looking at this graph on the first page of the March report. We have approximately $25 million of our portfolio that's invested in laddered investments with set maturities coming approximately every 3 months out to 3 years. And during 2019, you can see that our overall yield in the red line for our portfolio was pretty close, a little bit above in some cases, both the LGIP and the 3-month Treasury bill. Rates started going down at the second half of 2019, and with that, the yield on our portfolio has ticked up above those lines. You really see the impact in March, where short-term rates just fell tremendously. The 90-day Treasury bill dropped from about 1.5% to 0.33% in March, and that's now down to 0.10%. Our yield in our portfolio has remained around 2%, primarily because of those laddered investments. In projecting forward, I'm projecting that even with short-term rates dropping as much as they have, that we'll be able to hit our budget number for 2020. We probably won't see the large surplus in interest income that we had in 2019, but that laddered portfolio will help us in meeting our budget targets. The question is going to be what happens in the future, because as those investments mature, we're going to be reinvesting them at lower rates. We've been looking at what options there are to try to get the best yield we can and keep within the confines of our portfolio. We have a fairly balanced portfolio, as you can see by the spread of the different institutions where we have placements. The most recent investments we've done have primarily been in certificates of deposit. Those have been a better yield than federal agencies or treasuries. The second page of our report details all of the specific investments that we have purchased. The most recent were some additional CDs through Capital Bank. And then we did purchase some brokered CDs that are FDIC insured just in April. Yields, if you look at some of the yields in here, we had been purchasing things a year ago in the 3.2% range. Some of the last ones that we purchased are down to 2.2, and the most recent CDs I purchased are down to 1.35 for 3 years. But still, we're trying to lock in what we can, knowing where short-term rates are going. Be happy to answer any questions. We're planning to continue with our ladder, and that's helping to insulate us. So that would be our approach, is rather than trying to time the market, that we look for the best available options as investments come up for maturity.
So given that yield curve is sloping so much and we're still on the high side of that, are you thinking about reducing the duration of our investments so we don't get caught if and when interest rates start climbing back up? Right?
Yeah, as we look at investments, we are at any given period where we have something coming up, taking a look at options and seeing where the highest value is. Normally, we would, as things come up, just invest it at 3 years and keep that ladder structure in place. Most recently, I have purchased some CDs at both the 1 year and the 3 year, so we're not going out 3 years on everything at the lower interest rates, and that'll give us some opportunities to reinvest as rates do go up. But I don't want to completely abandon the 3-year investments as well. The goal in our investment policy is really to not try to outguess the market timing, and we want to have some investments that are locked in and keep that laddered structure. So I guess to answer your question, we're trying to do somewhat of a combination of both, of have some that are a little bit longer, but then also looking at some investments in the 1 year range where it makes sense, so that if interest rates start moving up, that we can take advantage of that change in rates.
Yeah, I mean, I get the fact that this is a mess, but so right now we're looking really good, right? So we're at 2, everybody else is below 1. The flip side of that is that we don't want to get to a point where, because we're stuck in our laddered portfolio, that if the interest rate environment rebounds, that we're at 2 or between 1.5 and 2 because of the interest rate risk that we've taken, and the market starts heading north of 2, right? That's the risk, is that we get behind the curve, right? So right now we're ahead of it. We just don't want to get behind the interest rate curve.
Right, and the laddered portfolio is really a big part of the strategy is to insulate ourselves from big swings in interest rates. So we're getting the benefit of that now in a severely declining interest rate environment. If we had a very sharply increasing interest rate environment, we wouldn't take full advantage of that. So we're kind of trading some potential upside there for more stability with our budget, which I think is a reasonable risk. But to your point, we want to make sure that we aren't, that we have some opportunities to take advantage of increasing rates when things turn around.
Right. Does anybody have any other questions?
No.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Next item is, revenue on, update on 2020 revenue projections.
Yeah, again, no action required here. I just wanted to provide an update for the committee and the council. We're trying to do our best to project what's happening with revenues given the COVID pandemic. The good news for the general fund is that most of our general fund revenues, our largest revenues, are relatively stable. We have the property tax at about 60% of the budget. Other major sources include the payment in lieu of taxes from the water utility, intergovernmental aids, interdepartmental charges. All of those make up a little more than 80% of the budget. The variable revenues would be things like room tax revenue, charges for services, building permits, licenses, fees, interest income. As we just talked about interest income, I think we'll be okay for hitting the budget number for this year. Our largest charge for service is ambulance revenue. That, at least for the first quarter, seems to be holding steady. We're projecting a big reduction in room tax revenue. And as you recall, the general fund receives 30% of room tax collections. Tourism receives 70%. We anticipate a large drop. We don't know exactly where we're going to end the year, obviously, but for just planning purposes, we've looked at if revenues drop to 70% of normal for first quarter, 20% for second quarter, 30% in third quarter, and then we start to see some rebounds by fourth quarter and getting up to 60%. That could have an impact of around $400,000 in the general fund and up to $1 million for the tourism fund. That's the biggest area of concern right now, and obviously it's a big impact for the tourism budget in particular. Within the general fund, as we were just talking about, we do have healthy reserve levels, but we're trying to project what type of impact that's going to be and how long that's going to be. Again, kind of in interest of time, you have my memo. If there's other specific questions, I'll do my best to address those.
So obviously the thing that's concerning here is the room taxes, both from a general fund perspective and also from tourism. So have you talked to Julie to figure out what you can turn off in terms of expenditures to kind of match those expected revenues?
Yeah, Julie and I have started those discussions, and I know tourism has been looking at, either grants that can be cut back or items related to events that likely would not be happening this year, and also trying to look at how they can reposition marketing dollars to try to attract travel and help with the second half of the year. Julie is on the call if there's specifics to add to the discussion. Hi, Julie.
Hi, guys. Yeah, Mark, to your point, I think Bill and I put together the worst case scenario that I heard on a webinar a couple of weeks ago. And I wish I had better news for you all, but the cancellations just continue to come. And the challenge is we're losing large events that we had hoped would generate revenue over and above what we were doing in 2019. So I'm looking at pulling back on the marketing budget considerably. We're looking at what we're calling the drive market and appealing to folks that are within, like a 250-mile range of where we are, which is mostly social media. We're pulling back on any contests that we've been doing that had expenses associated with them. And some of the work that we've been paying the agency to do, we're looking at taking in-house. So we're gradually starting a decrease on those expenditures. Bill and I are still trying to figure out what the Destination Madison expense is going to be. And to Bill's point, the other large expenses that we had were our grants. Events are canceling, and I really don't see any opportunity to backfill a lot of this work that we're losing. Probably aren't going to have anybody applying for these grants in 2020.
Okay.
So we're working on adjusting it down. I think the biggest challenge for us, Mark, is that it's an ever-shifting landscape. I mean, every week there's a new set of numbers that are coming out, and with each cancellation, there's another set of numbers. I was on a call last week with Destination Madison. As of that call, they were down 35 events, 80,000 attendees, and about 31 million in direct spending. I mean, we're seeing hotels close. It's just our industry is bleeding.
Right. And my concern is that we don't continue to spend money when there's no revenue coming in, right? So, so if we just need to figure out how to match those two, and I understand that it's a moving target, but just to have something in place that says, you know what, based on what we're seeing in terms of road taxes, that will only support a spend of whatever.
Correct.
That we have those metrics calculated and that we're following whatever we can do to make sure that those two line up.
Right.
Okay.
I am trying to work with the individual that is currently serving as a director of sales for the Madison Marriott West, which is where a lot of our larger business is going to be lost. And we're trying to open the lines of communication with North Central Group and get more information from them. So this is probably, I'm adjusting this thing every couple of weeks. And Bill reminded me that we do have a tourism fund balance, which I might actually tap into, Mark. I might actually spend some of that money that you've been asking me about all these years. Well, we'll try not to, though.
Right. So it's fortuitous, I guess, for the next agenda item. There is a representative from the North Central Group on the call. Maybe you guys can get together or figure out how to get together. So let's do the next item. This is a request from North Central Group for the deferred payment of first and second quarter 2020 room taxes. Just in terms of background, I think from an economic perspective, many companies are trying to preserve as much cash as possible. I can tell you that my own company is looking at every opportunity that the legislatures around the country have given businesses to defer income taxes, sales and use taxes, internationally, VAT taxes, state, I think I mentioned income taxes, but in all cases, what they're trying to do is provide opportunities to help businesses conserve cash. Some really long, some short term. With that, I think if you could open up the request, is there a request? Is there a document itself, Bill? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got the request up on the screen.
Right. So the concern that we would have is that, what's the appropriate deferral period? I think, Bill, you had mentioned that you were in contact with Madison. Is that correct? In terms of what they're
I haven't
doing?
spoken to them directly, but I did take a look at what the Madison Finance Committee was recommending. And my understanding is they were recommending deferral at the discretion of the city treasurer for up to the end of July, which is when the second quarter payment would be due, potentially with the ability to revisit that as you get closer to that deadline.
So I'm not sure. Well, so let's do this. Does anybody have any thoughts on whether we should do this?
Is there a discussion in the council chambers? If so, we're not hearing it on the Zoom.
Well, all right. So the way that I view this thing is that I think there's two issues here. The first is deferral of Q1 property tax room tax payments, and then the second is any deferral or discussion about the second quarter. So I'll make a motion that that we allow deferral of Q1 room taxes until July 31st for, I guess, all of the properties. And this is, it really has to be a blanket for all of the properties. Essentially, I don't know how you want to write the languages.
I would second that, and then we would revisit it at that time.
Well, I think we need a hard deadline of July 31st for Q1. And the question is, do we set another hard deadline for Q2, right? So when are Q2 taxes due? Is it 7/31 as well?
Yes. Yeah, so it's always the end of the month following the end of the quarter.
So, well, let's dispense of Q1. We have a motion and a second to allow.
Before you vote, when you said for all of them, you're referring to the 4 properties for which you've received this request from North Central. You're not referring to all hotels in the city of Middleton.
No, I was referring to all cities that pay us property taxes.
We don't have those numbers.
Pardon me?
We don't have those numbers, of course.
Right, I understand that, but it's an issue of fairness for everyone in the business, right? It's not that they have to defer; it's that Bill can allow. We'll give Bill the discretion to allow deferral up to July 31st for Q1.
Bill, you're comfortable with that?
Yes, I am. And I think part of the comfort in that is that we do have fund balance both in the general fund and in tourism that we can absorb, a short-term deferral of revenue. We would want to make sure that we do have payments timely within the budget year. And I think by taking this action, it gives us the opportunity to work with the hotels and get an additional information as we get into June and July, and they can make an additional request if circumstances warrant for your consideration at that time.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions?
So our motion is for all city hotels first quarter until July 31st.
At Bill's discretion, yes.
At Bill's discretion. Okay.
Can we, maybe at that point, can we get a report back on the number of folks who took us up on that offer, just as an FYI?
Yes.
Bill, are you going to notify the other properties of the decision?
Yeah, I think we would need to let all of them know about this action and that the opportunity is there, and ask them to submit a request that then we could review. We have received some first quarter room taxes already, although the majority, I think only one of the hotels has paid, and then we also have received a payment for from Airbnb for first quarter.
Mhm. Is there any problem since the agenda item actually calls out North Central Group that we are including all of them?
I think the issue is that we really can't grant a special dispensation to North Central Group.
Right,
If we're
but I'm
if we're
just
gonna
wondering
defer
if,
this, right, we have to give it to everybody.
right, but if it's not, is this a legal way to note it in the agenda, or should it say all? Or is this qualify then? That we can do it for all of them without any legal issues?
This is Larry. I see some merit in that. And in the interest of not undertaking anything where the affected parties do not have the opportunity to be heard, and where you know that a number of the first quarter room taxes have already been paid, I think it would be appropriate to defer this and have a more global discussion of it at a subsequent meeting. I mean, for example, Bill says that many have already paid, including B&Bs. So are we sending the ones who have paid and the Bs and B&Bs their room tax money back when they haven't requested any relief here? I think this is a lot broader than the agenda item, and for that reason, I think it's something. If this is the action the committee wants to take, I think this is probably too broad and potentially contrary to the open meetings law to take action in this way.
Larry, we do have a logistic challenge that the first quarter room taxes are due at the end of April. So we would need to have a special meeting in order to take this up before the current due date. And just to be clear, it's one of the hotels in the city that paid along with Airbnb. So it's not most of them, it's just one that I've received a payment for at this time.
And just trying to remember what hotels there are. Would that be the conference center is paid and nobody else has? Is that right?
Yes.
And again, for the sake of full disclosure, since we have the payments from the other hotels, how much did Marriott pay?
I don't believe I can provide that in a public forum because of confidentiality of room tax returns.
Well, the amounts have been disclosed here in this report.
But that's
another problem.
Well, I received a request from North Central to have a deferral, and I think that's different from a hotel that has not made a request at this point and providing the information in their room tax return.
So how about who did ask and let the others come forward and ask for it as well, if they want to.
Well, that avoids the arguable overbreadth of the proposed action, since that's in conformity with the agenda item.
all right. Then I will revise my motion to allow the North Central Group to defer their Q1 payments until July 31st.
I'll second it.
And all right, let's just vote on that one.
Okay.
Is there any other discussion on that? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. And then I'll make a subsequent motion to bring this topic back for on the next finance agenda for Q2.
Second.
And that's for all of the hotels, right?
For all the hotels, yes.
Yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
Perfect.
Is there any discussion on the second motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. I believe that's all we have. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn finance.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
So finance is adjourned.
No.